Best
Let's go.
horror. Best
Horror.
horror.
Horror. Horror game. Okay. I have Bill's vote. I have Denny's vote. And I have Sam's vote. And you're recording, Greg? We're good?
Yes.
And we're back with more of the Shacknews Awards 2023. Boo! Did I scare you? No? Anyway. We're going to talk about best horror game of the year. I'm not as scary as these games. I'm wearing a silly wig. But these games had me wigging out. Let's hit these nominations. Resident Evil 4 Remake. Dead Space Remake. Alan Wake 2. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You Will Die Here Tonight. And Dredge. Let's start with RE4. David, would you like to sing the praises of RE4?
Yeah, so the original RE4 went through a couple of redesigns, and a lot of the more traditional scares and horror elements were taken out. I think that they did a good job of kind of transplanting the ambient of a lot of the environments, like the castle, especially. I think there are a lot of really tense parts in that. Fighting the Del Lago in the sewers, but it was much more of an action-heavy game. The remake has much better pacing between tension and more traditional horror. Just really oppressive, dread-inducing environments. It's this game scared me quite a bit this year, much more than I expected, and I think that's part of why I like it as a horror game. Good horror can't just have you terrified for, if it's a movie, 90 minutes or 10 hours, because eventually you'll just get exhausted or nothing will really affect you. And I think RE4 does a great job shifting between action set pieces and really creepy, dread-inducing environments, and even some boss fights. Like I can't remember, it's not a boss. I can't remember the creature's name, but the blind creature with like the Wolverine claws that hunts you by sound. The first time you encounter one of those things is pretty messed up, and it's even scarier if you go for the achievement, as I did, to kill it using only the knife. That was a fun time. It probably took a couple years off my life, but yeah, I think RE4 is a really great. It's action survival horror, but the horror really shines through this time compared to the original.
There's something to be said about a game where you're really well armed and you're still scared. Like I think that's an accomplishment unto itself. Like David said, it is still survival horror. There is ammo's a little more plentiful in this game, but like I could still have a good weapon like a shotgun and still be scared about what I'm going to hit around the corner, right? So that's definitely to its credit.
Yeah, and I think it has that advantage over RE7 and 8. I think RE7 especially starts out as a really strong horror game, but you fight so few enemies at a time that by the end you're a walking tank, and it's pretty easy to just slap them all down. RE4 never gets that easy, even when you are armed to the teeth.
I also think the environmental design, like the level design in
Yeah,
RE4 Remake, lends to it increases the horror vibe, because what they do around the lake, for instance, or
yeah.
even in the village itself. Yeah, I just think that the new coat of paint goes a long way to making certain things scarier than they were in the original.
There's that
Yeah.
room with the body bags that have regenerators in them, and I was absolutely.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of ammo. Like I'm really good at conserving. I'm just terrified. Like I didn't want to. I tried to not touch any of them. I'm going like at a snail's pace, crouching, just waiting for these things to all drop and have to run through them or something. It was terrifying.
That's a great example of something they changed in the remake. Like in the original RA4, there's a body bag, but I don't think there was a regenerator in it. I'm not the freezer, but another area on the island. In the same area in the remake, there are lots of body bags hanging, and potentially anyone you touch could drop another regenerator. So you can really fuck yourself over. That's at the end of the game when you probably have several fully upgraded weapons, and you are still going to wet yourself if any of those things get out. I'll also say, to your credit, Asif, or to your point, the environmental design is great, and it actually factors into the gameplay. That
Mhm.
first fight against the blind sound hunter guys, you're in a dungeon and you're kind of like crab walking around trying to get to its back where it's vulnerable. but there are a bunch of manacles and shackles hanging from the ceiling, and if you touch those, it will hear them rattle and come right at you, and that's pretty fucking terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a perfect example of what I was talking about, and
Hmm.
it's different than the original. The original feels like an action game more than a horror game, and I think that this is both. They did a good job of it. But yeah, sorry,
Yes.
TJ, were you about to say something?
It's also worth noting that on Nightmare difficulty, it can hear everything but your very slowest footsteps. So trying to navigate around it and stay out of the reach of its weapons without like tipping it off to you, because you have like it will move in your general direction and you have to kind of get out of the way, and moving anything but like crouching slow walk will tip it off, and it makes it all the more intense.
The Garador, I think it's called.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Sweet. Anyone else want to sing the praises of this amazing video game that Capcom gave us this year?
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm done in this category. No, TJ can go ahead.
I think like Greg brought up the good point of like you can, one of my biggest issues with horror gaming as a whole is you eventually become too powerful in a lot of games, and it just never felt that way in Resident Evil 4, in the original or in the remake, in my opinion. You're
Yeah.
always threatened by
Oh, yeah.
something bigger and stronger coming around the corner that uses different tactics that you might not be ready for. The fight with Ramon's left hand in the tunnels, I take that fight every time. But it's because I appreciate that fight. And I also appreciate people that just nope the hell out of that situation because you can. Like you just need to hold off and get that elevator going. You have to. Or as David put it, you might be using that rocket launcher, the one that you can get for that entire chapter.
Yeah, but you know what though? Like that's a great point. Like I've replayed the remake a few times. I've replayed the original more times than I can count. Every time I get to that in certain other areas, my heart races because no matter how, like I've gone through the original without picking up a single treasure map. I know where they all are, but that part in the original and the remake, I'm still like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Even if I have my rocket launcher.
Because the crux of the situation is, in order to do good damage to it, you have to use like pipes that freeze it, and
Yeah.
eventually you have a finite amount of those pipes. If you miss one, you might as well reload your save. And eventually you run out of them either way, and you have to finish it off in like head-to-head combat. It's a hard fight. It's a horrifying fight, and it's like an encapsulation of most of the things I love about this game.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've hit the RE4 topic as hard as we could for this category. Obviously, we'll be talking about it in a lot more other categories because it's a very good game. Another good game that was also a remake came out early this year, right? Dead Space. David, I know you really, really like this game, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love the original. I love the remake, and I think I mentioned in another category that there was a lot of talk online about why does Dead Space even need a remake? It still looks great. And then you see the remake and you're like, "Oh, yeah, okay. It was definitely time." And I thought that it's more of a one-to-one remake. There are a lot of new areas, and what they really do is they basically look at each room and kind of decide. They make two decisions: how can we extend this so that the new content feels organic, and how can we really dial up the atmosphere to 11? And I would say similar to RE4 with Leon, Isaac Clarke in Dead Space is never that much more powerful than his enemies because they attack in such great numbers. I really like the atmosphere in this game. I'm a big fan of haunted houses, and the USG Ishimura is effectively a haunted house. I also like that when you can backtrack because you get to form this bond with the environment, and also you'll let your guard down when you pass through areas that you've cleared before because the whole lore of this game is the necromorphs are crawling through the vents. So it's not like a monster closet where you're suddenly attacked by a monster in an area you've cleared. conceivably, according to the lore, they could have been scuttling around and heard you and then dropped in. So that actually doesn't feel cheap. It feels like something that would happen in the environment. I think that I guess my only knock on the game compared to Resident Evil 4 is that, TJ and I have talked a lot about Act 3, the island, where in the original it did get very bombastic and turn into more of a dumb action movie. A dumber, because Resident Evil 4 is already pretty dumb, but in a fun way. But in RE4 Remake, it's more balanced. Dead Space, I did get to a point near the end where I was kind of getting bored killing things. There were so many, and they were always coming at me that, back to the talk of pacing, I didn't feel that they got that quite right in the end. It felt like there were like Dead Space 2 amount of enemies coming at me.
Okay. Interesting.
This is my first foray into the Dead Space franchise. I never played any of them. I didn't have the money to buy them at the time. But this is my first time I ever played a Dead Space game was the remake. So to David's point, I think it was scarier than RE4, but that's only because I didn't know the beats. Like if I played through the game once, I would know the beats, and then I wouldn't be as frightened. But I did like the atmosphere of the game. I did like the semi-realistic, almost like alien feel. The one thing I didn't like about it was the the gravity thing. That thing was a little weird to me. That felt a little too futuristic to me. Like almost like a gravity gun in this game. I was like, that's a little much. I felt at certain times, and it became really powerful too.
Like the freedom of movement, or the
your wristband could like freeze enemies, like in like
stasis. Oh, the stasis.
Stasis. Thank you. Yeah. I thought it was a little weird, like that kind of. When I had to use that to beat a boss, I feel like it pull me out of the world a little bit because it felt so down to earth for a science fiction game. And then whenever I had to, you lift the enemy up with your stasis ability, I'm like, well, this is a little wild. But it was still really cool. I haven't beaten the game yet. I haven't gotten that far in it actually, but like I see a lot of similarities to like what did Resident Evil do? How can we do that better? Like, what is horror science fiction haven't done that we can do better? And like a lot of it is like good environmental storytelling, nice enemy variety, lots of lighting in this one. Like I can't see anything, and so it's terrifying. So I think it was pretty good horror. Like if his job was to scare me, it did a great job.
Mm-hmm. And the gore is pretty great in the game.
It is. Yeah.
I know that's not for everyone, but for a horror category, I think we have to talk about how disgusting the gore can get.
Yeah, I mean, again, like you do the most damage by dismembering enemies, and then all of them after they're dead will drop an item, and the most efficient way to get that is to just stomp them into a pulp. So, yeah.
Awesome. But yeah, 2 really good remakes back to back. Our next nominee is not a remake, but it's almost like it kind of is. Alan Wake 2. No one, I don't think anyone expected this one. this was going into 2023. I don't think we were like, yep, this Alan Wake 2 game is going to take the world by storm, but it did. And it is an excellent horror game. Right from the jump, you get to take control of a big old fat guy who's climbing out of a lake, only to encounter some murderous cult members who like literally disembowel you on a table. Like that's just the first 30 seconds of this game. Things get weirder and weirder, and the concept of the mind space is super cool. It's a great mechanic for this game. Trying to solve crimes is fun. I feel like I'm Charlie Kelly and It's Always Sunny with my board trying to find Pepe Sylvia. But yeah, I think that this game is very different from these past 2 games we mentioned, where yes, there's action in this game, but it definitely feels more like a suspenseful kind of horror game. It does use jump scares. There are jump scares in Alan Wake 2.
That's one thing I didn't like about it. Like I love the atmosphere, especially at the beginning. Like you spend so much time in the woods that you can see the passage of time. And anytime a horror story does that, you know that as soon as it gets dark, shit's about to go down. But I don't know, it just used a few too many jump scares for me, which I feel like given that all the work that Remedy put into creating such great environment, a great story, a great buildup of tension, felt like they kind of stepped on their own feet a couple times.
Yeah, that was. Sorry, go ahead, DJ.
like in most of the instances, the use of a jump scare in Alan Wake 2 is meant to be the dark place leaking out into the real world. And so as a functional like narrative piece, I feel like there's probably a better way they could have done it, but it's hard for me to fault them for going about that way because the dark place, its effect on reality is like the core element of its terrifying presence. It's it changes people, it changes space, it changes things, it changes animals, and like you got like Cujo wolves running around the woods. I hate wolves in that game. I hate them. They're the worst. They move too fast, they do too much damage, and they cannot be killed until you get the darkness off them, and it just I hate them. They're the worst. Like they're that guy with the knife in Streets of Rage 4 coming at you at all times.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do like that it's an extension of the world. I think the problem is there are certain things in any medium that can take me out of it. Like
Mhm.
a jump scare is still a jump scare. Like to me, it's as jarring as the Wilhelm scream. It's just no matter what it is a jump scare, and it's kind of irritating to me personally. But I
Yeah.
do like that it is a function of the world.
And like Asif brought up the Mind Place. I think one of the most you better make sure you're in a safe place before you go into the Mind Place or the
Yeah.
writer's room because you can be attacked while you're in there.
I love
And I-
that.
That was
And
something
I-
I noticed too.
And I
I know
will
that.
never forget the time when I found out, like when I was in there sorting out clues and thinking about what I wanted to do next, and then suddenly I'm yanked back out to the game because something just slugged me, and I'm like, oh no!
Yep. Yeah, that is not a pause screen, ladies and gentlemen. The mind
Yeah.
plays, you have to there is a strategic way to use the mind place in the game. And I think there are times where the game tries to lull you into a false sense of security because you just got all all this new evidence. Why don't you go to the mind place? And it's
Well,
like
and
I'm
that's the
not going to
thing.
trust you at this moment.
That's exactly the thing. When you're introduced to it, and for the first good stretch of the beginning, there are no enemies around. So you get used to going to the mine place as kind of this like, oh, this is nice and quiet, and I can concentrate. So you're used to using it in this context, and you don't even realize it's not a pause screen. You don't realize that until the first time you get bitch slapped while you're pinning stuff up on your corkboard there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
that's awesome.
the sense of dread this game builds, the sense of threat around you, the implications of what's coming. I've always loved the pages in Alan Wake. I think those are one of the best parts of it because like you get that foreboding sense of oh no, this is something I have to deal with shortly, and they do such a good job with that here. And I've mentioned it with Alan. Like he rewrites the world sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes the things that he needs to rewrite the world with are really terrible. And like there's a train station in the game, and I won't give too much away about it, but it's the site of a murder scene. And when you have to rewrite that into the murder scene, that entire environment takes on a devastatingly horrific tone. And that's the kind of stuff that happens throughout Alan Wake 2. It does such a good job of slowly escalating and peeling back the little teases of what you're about to face and making you realize just how much danger you're about to be in.
Mhm.
I will say for me for that game, I've played a little bit of it, not a ton. I feel like it has the same issue, and this is really an issue with us, like the Evil Within, David, right? Like I played those games a while back ago because it was by the maker Resident Evil. This is gonna be great, but it's a psychological horror game rather than horror, right? It's not a virus of mutated creatures. You're in someone's mind, and I feel like that's part of the horror of Alan
But
Wake
there's
2.
still
But the
the
other
shadows,
half,
Greg.
what?
Like the shadows are
I was gonna. Yeah, the other half is supernatural. So you have a supernatural and psychological horror element, and I feel that didn't grab me as much as other games. I kind of like it. This is proto parts. I like it when my horror's more grounded. I know, like viruses out of space station or like giant mutated atrocities are a stretch, but like it's more believable than like a ghost coming out of a wall or me going into someone's head. Experiencing trauma.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
What is it,
You,
Greg?
you,
Yeah.
Who are you gonna call?
the number one Ghostbusters influencer on the internet that I'm just proclaiming right now.
Oh, it's
That
not.
You
It's
don't
not horror.
believe
Ghostbusters
ghosts?
isn't horror though.
Look,
You don't
There you
believe
go.
in
Sure.
ghosts?
No.
Really?
No.
What's the
Uh,
You
proton pack
own a
for?
proton
Greg
pack.
ain't afraid of no ghost.
For funsies. It's
You
for
own a
funsies.
proton
Greg ain't
pack.
afraid of no ghost.
Wow.
He's afraid of no ghost.
But
He's been through this dog and pony show. He's kind of a ghost or two.
yeah.
So I actually get what you're saying, Greg.
Mhm.
I think to me
for sure.
the horror game that like struck the best balance between like more visceral horror and psychological horror is probably Eternal Darkness. I don't know that it's been beaten, but I think to your point, I like psychological horror. And what I said earlier about the jump scares, that kind of takes me right out of what psychological horror should be.
Mhm.
And
Same.
that's part of the issue I had with it.
I think that's the same issue I have, David. Is like I don't mind the narrative side of this at all. Like that Alan can control the world and that you find pages and reading those pages are creepy as hell. Like I love all of that. I just don't think jump scares are necessary. You can scare the crap out of people in all sorts of ways in video games now. And I think that specifically harkens back to an older time in horror game design that I just don't think is necessary anymore.
Yeah, what I really like about being able to, about being vulnerable in the mind place is that
Mhm.
feels subversive as well
Yeah.
as terrifying. Like horror games existed before Resident Evil, but Resident Evil popularized coined the term survival horror. And in that, the most popular survival horror franchise, you learn that safe room equals safe. I'm
Yeah.
good in here. And the mind space kind of resembles a save room until you realize for the first time, no, you're not safe there. And I like the subversiveness of that. And I
Yeah.
feel like that is clever. The jump scares are like it's inverse for me. Like I
Mhm.
don't like the jump scares at all. I really like the subversiveness of the mind space.
I'm same camp over here.
I feel like there's a lot of little details that Alan Wake 2 gets right in terms of horror too. Like
Definitely.
when you're in like a save room, like a lit area, and you see Taken wandering around outside and you take a shot at them and then the lights turn off because they've noticed you. That is a dangerous moment in your life when you realize, oh no, if I engage them, the lights go out and I have to they know.
Yeah, I do like the first time you have to learn that. Like without giving too much away, it's pretty obvious looking at the copes of this bloated fat guy that eventually he's going to become a problem. And when he does, that was terrifying for me. That was like one of the scariest moments of the year, I would say, just because it was all new. That you were experiencing all this for the first time in that game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the first chapter, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say he does the Undertaker sit up, and he does it well.
yes.
I love it.
And he goes, yeah. I love that. That is exactly what it is.
Still waiting for that likeness check from Remedy. I had no idea it was in the game.
Come on.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so unless anyone wants to stand up on top of a mountain and proclaim their love of Alan Wake 2, we should move on to the next nominee.
It's kind of a 2-horse race. I feel like we can breeze through the rest of these.
Sure, but let's give the Texas Chainsaw Massacre some credit where it's due, man. This is one of the more unique horror games to ship this year. It's an asymmetric multiplayer game that does horror extremely well. I love
Really
this
tough
game.
to do for
Yeah.
a multiplayer horror game. A lot is lost when you make a game online and multiplayer as far as like horror factor goes. And the fact that Gun Interactive and Sumo Digital like paid so much attention to the fine details of that original 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so much as to like travel to Texas and like tour through the house and like get down every nitty detail to like scratches on the floor and like paintings on the walls and whatnot, so that when you actually play on that map and you walk into the house for the first time, it's like chilling. Like I was playing with Survivor. It was like my 6th or 7th match that I finally got to be a survivor on that level, and I walked through those doors and I was like, dear, it was very unsettling, like seeing that red wall with the like animal skeletons hanging on it, where Leatherface slams the door shut after like grabbing the dude in the beginning or middle of the first movie, or just seeing all those parts of the house and walking around it is genuinely terrifying. And then from like a sound design perspective, hearing that chainsaw rev up,
Yep.
just
Yep.
which is like a sound you never want to hear real life or in video games, is a chainsaw revving up. But hearing that like just like one room away, just like the way my eyes shoot open every time, where I'm like, oh shit, I'm in danger. It's terrifying. It is a very scary game. I think it's the scariest of all the asymmetrical horror stuff, more so than Dead by Daylight or Friday the 13th was. Uh, that game is very scary.
And they
Very good
nailed
game.
the pace of play, right? Like the speed at which your
Mhm.
character's running around, the balance between how survivors' locomotion is versus the murderous killers. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think they did an amazing job of like doing right by the franchise, right? Doing right by the original film, but also creating this like brand new gaming experience for that IP. It's excellent. And I know it's not Resident Evil 4, it's not Alan Wake 2, it's not Dead Space, it's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's a multiplayer game. So it kind of sticks out in this category, but it is an excellent horror game in its own right.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I had a blast playing it during Big Team Building. I actually outsmarted some people by repeatedly jumping into the well. Everyone's like, "There's no way he went back into the house." Way, I did it twice.
Way.
And then like finally like, oh, okay, we're gonna go down there, and that's when I snuck out. I snuck by Donovan at one point. Yeah, that's a game that I really think we should stream again from multiple perspectives so that people could see
That'd be fun.
just how silly things get in that game. But yeah, it's a very unique game that came out, and it kind of sticks out in this category because it is the only real, like, it's the only asymmetric multiplayer game in this category this year. But yeah, shout out to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because sometimes movie IP does not translate well to video game. These folks
No.
really did an
That IP
amazing
has struggled
job.
everywhere for
Yeah.
many years.
Yeah,
So,
you're right. Even through reboots and a film, but yeah, like, they did right by the original film. That original film still holds up very well. I know it's
mhm.
lower budget, but for what it is and what they like, you look back at what they did with the money they had, and that was very impressive. And that was a
I
different
think that's
era.
why it's effective.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
different era of horror, right? Like they were kind
Yeah.
of kitschy at times, and it was, I don't know, I find something charming about that era of horror compared to like the Saws of the world, in modern horror. So
Mhm.
yeah, my old ass loved the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and if you're a boomer, you will too. No. Next nominee is You Will Die Here Tonight. TJ, I believe you had some things to say about this.
Yeah, this was Sam's nomination, and it's a good one. Like, this is a game that harkens back to a very specific title, Resident Evil Gaiden, which a lot of people probably don't know about, but they took a very interesting approach to that game in which you have like a top-down view of the situation, and then when you end up in a combat with monsters, it moves to a first-person, like, sort of House of Dead vibe. And You Will Die Here Tonight takes on that same approach with some twists. Like, I do believe that there's actually a finite amount of characters you have in this game, and if you lose them, kind of like in the actually right out of the original inspiration for Resident Evil, if you lose a character, you lose them. I'm pretty sure. And so like this game is like a love letter to a lot of very, very, very old school niche horror design. And a lot of those games had issues in some way or another. Like it's not easy to play Resident Evil Gaiden. It's not easy to play the oh gosh, David, what's the game that inspired Resident Evil? Do you know it?
Sweet Home.
Sweet Home. Thank you. It's not easy to play either of those games, and it's certainly not easy to even find them to play them.
Yeah.
So to have those elements refined and put into a new horror game This is like what we had last year with our horror indie nomination. I'm so like Signalis.
Mm.
Signalis was a great game last year, and it's cool to see that indie developers are sort of taking these old school things that we liked about the old school horror games, ironing out the kinks, getting rid of some of the wrinkles, and producing new original content with them. It's not gonna like land on the same. It might not land on the same level as Resident Evil 4 or Alan Wake 2 because they don't have millions of dollars of budget to work with. But these are love letters to like some of our favorite memories in gaming, and I really am happy that You Will Die Here Tonight exists.
I'm watching gameplay now, TJ and David. This like even they got the shoulder pad gear like from the characters from Resident Evil 1, and like all the environments look like right out of the mansion. It's very love lettery, like you said, very
Mhm.
inspired by the original Resident Evil.
Resident Evil Guide is great too. That's a really cool. Of all the Resident Evils to draw inspiration from, I was like, what? Like that's a really cool idea.
Nice. Another solid nominee in a completely stacked category. Surprise, surprise. It's the Shacknews Awards. Our last nominee is Dredge. Ozzy, I believe you reviewed this for Shacknews. Am I
I
right?
did. So Bill and I had a debate as to whether Dredge is a horror counts as a horror game. And the thing with Dredge is the way it sets up atmosphere as you're fishing at night, because you have that option to fish during the day and you can have like a nice little cozy experience. But if you fish at night, there's a deeper mystery going on in the game to where you're finding like Cthulhu like fish, like you're finding like warped monstrosities in the ocean. And you could get the sense that as you take your fishing boat out at night, that there's something in the water. There's a giant creature in the water. The way it sets up the atmosphere with the lighting, the music, and everything else, and then when whatever's in the water actually hits your boat, it kind of does scare the crap out of you. So I will give it that it gets the horror atmosphere right, and that's part of the reason why, like towards the end of Dredge, I'm like, can I avoid fishing at night? Can I just fish during the day and just like avoid the mon? Although, yeah. So I got some good scares out of Dredge. I counted it as a horror game. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this into this category.
Are you sure it's the ocean or is it Lake Erie?
It's it's whatever you want it to be, Asif.
Because I'm just, if we're talking about three-eyed fish like from The Simpsons, like
It's also
pretty sure.
Cthulian. It's like Cthulian Lovecraftian horror too. Like not yeah. So it
Yeah.
takes more of that angle.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I would not be surprised if they pull the Cthulhu-looking squid out of Lake Erie.
That's the thing. Like, if this is Lovecraftian and I'm the protagonist of Dredge, I'm not going to get in that boat because looking, that's where all Lovecraftian characters get fucked. Like, you're too curious,
You have to
and now it's
investigate.
over. You know,
And you can reinforce that boat all you want, but if
Yeah.
something hits you on the side, like you're gonna lose half your cargo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a different kind of horror, but I think it fits in this category. And yeah, I also love fishing games, so it's my kind of jam right there. They also announced a crossover with Dave the Diver, right?
They sure did. It's an update for Dave the Diver, but like yeah, just I think they saw that the fishing elements of Dave the Diver, and they're just like, you know what, our two properties would fit pretty well with each other. I hope Dredge gets some sort of Dave the Diver DLC.
Yeah,
which
I want it to be like a Jetsons meets the Flintstones sort of
Exactly.
situation. Either way, a fine nomination. Should we get to voting? Sound like a plan? Let's do it. I will start with David.
I am going to go RE4, but just to briefly explain why, Dead Space, very scary, but it's a more conservative type of remake. I do prefer more experimental. And toward the end, I felt too powerful. And then Alan Wake 2, I felt that it kind of got in its own way too often for me. Resident Evil 4's pacing between action and horror is much more consistent and never gets in its own way. So that's my goal.
Nice. Donovan.
I'll stick with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'll put one down for the movie bros.
I thought you were gonna go completely off the reservation and just give it to like the latest Scream movie or something. Uh, Greg.
No, it's tough because like David said, like I was more afraid when I played Dead Space, but that's because I didn't know the beats. But like I said, Resident Evil 4, I was more scared in parts of Resident Evil 4, even when I knew what was coming. So I'm gonna stick with RE4.
Okay. TJ.
Resident Evil 4 remake.
Ozzy.
I really liked Alan Wake 2, but I'm gonna go with Resident Evil 4.
Steve.
Resident Evil 4.
Would have
Okay.
been a sweep. Thanks, Donovan. Just kidding.
No.
Just kidding.
I
No,
was
it
expecting
wouldn't.
to play spoiler.
It wouldn't have been a sweep because we have
Oh.
3 absentee
We do
ballots.
have 3 absentee ballots.
That's right.
All voted for the Texas
Bill?
Chainsaw Massacre.
No, they didn't.
I'm sure they all did.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. You are overruled.
No.
You're almost out of order, but right now that statement is overruled. No, they all voted for Alan Wake 2. Denny, Bill, and Sam all voted for Alan Wake 2. So if Donovan didn't vote for Texas Chainsaw Massacre and voted for Alan Wake 2, I could have created some gridlock. Instead, I'm going to vote for Resident Evil 4 like I planned on this whole time. Because, it scares the crap out of me. And there's a chainsaw sound in that game that's also pretty terrifying. And stay tuned to Awesome Games Done Poorly for the all bear trap run.
I
Yeah,
forgot about that. Oh,
I'm
man.
just god awful at some of these games. So if you really want to just laugh, like my brother just loves trolling me while I play Resident Evil 4. He's like,
Donate $5 for every bear trap.
yeah, like seriously, like, oh, you found another bear trap. He literally calls the game Bear Trap the game because of how much I step into bear traps. But like, yeah, that game, to Greg's point, like even though I know the story of RE4, the remake differs a little bit from it, but it's also just, I know the beats, but the timing is still different. The pacing is still different than the original game. And to David's point, that pacing is what made it, I think, a better horror game than maybe even the original. So yeah, it was a close one. All these games, if you're into horror, check them all out. They're all awesome.
Yeah.
They're all unique, and some of these are different. They're not. I would even say Alan Wake 2 and RE4 are very hard to compare, because just the story, the way that things happen in it, there's different mechanics in both games. I think they're both great, and it's going to be a personal taste kind of thing for most people. But here at Shack News, we did a democratic vote here, and Resident Evil 4 is our best horror game of the year 2023.
Then come, Sancho Panza. Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea.
You're gonna hurt yourself.
Mm.